Hi, my name is Margaret Kaplan, and I'm the Community Development Director at Minnesota Housing. For those of you who aren't familiar with Minnesota Housing, we are the statewide housing finance agency. Our mission is to finance affordable housing for low and moderate income households while fostering strong communities. And we try and do this in a variety of ways. We have a ton of different programs really serving anyone from people who've experienced long-term homelessness, who need supportive housing to sort of take that first step off the streets, through financing affordable multifamily housing for folks who are working sort of moderate wage jobs, through creating homeownership opportunities through some of our mortgage financing products, so folks can become first-time home buyers. And we do this across the state, and this can create some challenges because when you're looking at a state as big as Minnesota with communities, everything from the south side of Minneapolis to the northern part of Roseau County, you have a lot of different objectives that you're trying to achieve under one fairly small umbrella and with very limited resources. So what this means for us is we're thinking about sort of the shifting way that we're thinking about the connections between affordable housing and the work that we're doing and other community issues like economic development, like transportation, and particularly putting this in an equity context, is we need to increasingly be thinking about how we do our work in these very, very different ways. And like a lot of public entities, we move with, it's kind of like turning the Queen Mary, giant boat, move slowly, try and make change. And sometimes it can be a very frustrating process. But one of the things that I think has kind of helped us a little bit along the way is having some really strong leadership, both within our organization itself, with our commissioner, Mary Tingerthal, deciding that equity, that community engagement, that engaging with communities in different ways and having voices at the table in different ways as we were making our decisions was something that we cared about, even if we didn't necessarily know how to do it. And then also, I think particularly when you look at the Twin Cities region, having some very strong leaders who are increasingly kind of coming together and thinking about the way that we talk about equity and the way that we talk about disparities and the connection that equity and public investments have to each other in a more coordinated way. I think that helps us sort of make changes in the work that we do. So one of the things that I think is really interesting when you look at the connection between transportation and housing investments, and Owen touched on this a little bit, there are a couple different camps about that relationship because when you look at the way that decisions are made and we're trying to coordinate investments, some folks would look at that and say, well, if you're connecting housing investments with transportation investments, you're probably going to be creating more investment in affordable housing in the urban core than you are in suburban communities. On the other hand, if you look at what's happening with the build-out of the transit system around the metro area, you'll see that increasingly it's kind of a both-and approach. So you've got investments along the central corridor of St. Paul, but you also have these emerging investments that are going to be happening in suburban communities. And one of the things that I think has been our approach, at least as we look at this, is we don't want to say that you invest in one place and not another. We're really trying to figure out how you create a balanced approach. Because we want to help people have housing choices, and we want these housing choices to be real choices. What we mean by that, for it to be a real choice, it needs to have really three things to it. One, it has to be a choice that's free of discrimination. That's something that I've heard a lot of people say, oh, well, we're really good at identifying where discrimination is happening. Well, sometimes we are and sometimes we're not. But I think that's something that you can test for. That's something that hopefully increasingly we're going to be investing in. Metropolitan Council is going to be investing in. We hope to have strong partners so that we can figure out where is that sort of direct discrimination happening. The other thing that you need is you need to have those choices be informed choices. So it's not just about, okay, we're going to build housing and just kind of leave it out there, but really have this dialogue with communities as developments are happening around the region to talk about what does it mean to a family to be living in one place versus another place. If you've got a Section 8 voucher, what is the difference for your family between living in a suburban community and an urban community? And both of those have some really good parts to them. Both of those have some challenges to them. It's not up to us to decide where you make that choice, but we want to make sure that you have the information to make that choice. And then the third thing is just, quite frankly, creating housing opportunities, and creating housing opportunities in a variety of places. And if you look at the way that we've been investing in affordable housing development over the past few years, it really has been a fairly balanced approach. So a lot of our new production of affordable housing is in suburban communities. A lot of that is in relationship to places where you've got job growth, where you've got high-performing schools. But then, on the other hand, there are places in Minneapolis and St. Paul, particularly along the transit ways, where that investment in affordable housing is coupled with other economic development opportunities that are happening. And so you've got sort of this connection between that $1 billion investment in the Central Corridor Light Rail, some affordable housing development, some work that's happening for small business development, workforce growth, connections between the major anchor institutions and communities. So really trying to have that connection. Because one of the things, if you look at some of the literature about the way that we invest in transportation systems, and this doesn't matter if they're in urban or suburban or ex-urban communities, and that is, it's less important what the mode of transportation is than the kinds of sort of connected and coordinated investment that's happening around it. But all of this is somewhat irrelevant if you don't have a really good sense of what community needs are and what communities want. You can create affordable housing opportunities that are happening in isolation places that have no relationship at all to cultural communities, low-income communities, communities of color. And so, you are then creating units, but you're not necessarily connecting it to that bigger sense of building communities, building power, and making sure that people are who are the experts in their own lives after all, are really seeing this as a community benefit. In other words, we don't want to be doing affordable housing to people. We want to be creating affordable housing with people. One of the questions on my little sheet, I'm going to follow the Owen model, is what else do you think needs to be done at the individual, grassroots, and systems level? I think a lot needs to be done. And one of the things that I would be absolutely the first to admit, as somebody who fairly recently moved from community organizing to the public sector in all of its glory, is that we're not very good at talking about race at all. We're getting better, but it's a slow process. We're not very good at talking about equity because that can be really, really scary, and when we talk about equity, we don't always know what that means. We're getting better, but it's a slow process. And so in terms of what we need from the community, I think there are two really big things that I'm sure y'all would be more than happy to do. One is, as affordable housing developments are happening around the region, they're frequently under attack from folks who would rather not have affordable housing in their communities. And the people who want local governments to say no show up, and they show up loudly. The people who want local governments to say yes tend to stay home. And so the more that the people who are on the side of yes, we think affordable housing is a good thing for our community, and yes, we're not afraid of making sure that there's housing opportunities for folks sort of across the income spectrum. I think the easier it makes us, the easier it is for us to do our work. Another thing, and Owen touched on this a little bit, is we're not terribly good at telling our story, telling the narrative, because we're not the ones with the stories. I mean, we fund the buildings. It's folks who are living in the communities who have the stories. And so the more that we have really good narratives from folks in communities who value affordable housing, I think it makes this stronger case across the region that affordable housing is not a scary thing. And lastly, I think that something that we really need from community is we need community to be demanding accountability of us regularly. Because it is when people are demanding accountability that we change what we do in some pretty significant ways. Every change that we've made in the way that we think about, for example, the amount of points that a proposal will get for economic integration. That's as a result of folks in communities saying, you know what, it's really important that we're doing this. Developing new programs to make sure that low-income people of color have better access to mortgage financing in spite of some pretty terrible practices by some lending institutions. That's something that's coming up that is being developed with community and as a result of people saying this is a clear need. So, some folks I think would be sort of skeptical of this idea that we want people to demand things of us. That's really the only way that change happens within public institutions. And I'm going to pass it along to Winfred now.